Hello, and thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about The Shawshank Redemption by Stephen King. Actually, the full title is Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption by Stephen King, published in 1982, and the movie adaptation is directed by Frank Darabont and was released in 1994. So I posted a poll on my YouTube community page, and the theme was Stephen King novellas, and this was one of the options. And this is the one I expected to win because everybody loves this movie, right? Whether you're a fan of Stephen King or not, this movie is so popular. So many people list it as their favorite movie of all time. So I would have been shocked if one of the other options won, to be honest. But I put a poll up anyway, and this one did indeed win. So definitely subscribe to my YouTube channel. I do post community polls fairly regularly. And if you become a Patreon, you can take part in polls even more often. So I will link to my Patreon down below. And of course, the subscribe button is right there too if you're watching this on YouTube. So subscribe, like this video, comment your thoughts, all that good stuff. So to start with a book review, I actually read this novella before in 2020. And at the time, I thought it was fine. It didn't stick with me, but I liked it. And honestly, this time around, I feel kind of the same, where it's that was good. But it wasn't profound, and it didn't strike a chord with me, the way some books do. I do love reading Stephen King's non-horror though, because he is just a great writer, and so many people just think oh, I wouldn't read him because I don't like horror. But he has so many other books that are not horror, so definitely check him out in different seasons. This was published in a book, Different Seasons, which is a compilation of 4 different novellas, which is funny because when I read this in 2020, I started Apt Pupil, which is the second novella in the book, and I did not like Apt Pupil, so I don't think I even finished it, and then I didn't read any of the other novellas, so I wouldn't recommend that one, but you should check out Shawshank Redemption. 11/22/63 is another popular one that is not horror. So yeah, even if you don't like horror books, don't write Stephen King off because he has plenty of options for those who don't like the scary stuff. And then as far as the movie, this is my first time watching this movie. I think I started it years ago, over a decade ago now, because there was someone else who wanted to watch it. But anyway, this was my first time watching it all the way through. And I get why people name it as one of their all-time favorite movies, and people, on Letterboxd that think it's just flawless and it's just the perfect film. And I agree, yeah, it was incredible. I wouldn't list it in my top 10 favorite movies or something. It didn't break into that, but I did like it a lot. And Tim Robbins plays the main character, Andy, which, by the way, Tim Robbins, he was not nominated for this movie, but he did win an Oscar for Mystic River, which I have covered, so you should definitely check that out. That is a great book and movie. Anyway, he is quoted talking about this movie, saying, "I'm proud of that film. It's unlike other films that people talk to you about. It's very important to people in a deep way. And it's beyond just liking the film. It's more profound than that. I've had people tell me that it's shifted the way they think, that it brought them out of a depression, that it made them understand a deeper truth about themselves. That's a pretty cool thing to be involved in. And when people are telling you pretty much on a daily basis, you're in my favorite movie of all time, that's a pretty cool bucket list thing to check off." And I do think that's so cool, to be part of a movie that so many people hold dear. That would feel pretty awesome to have people come up to you and say a movie you were in impacted them in a deep way and changed their thinking and gave them a new perspective. That would be awesome to be part of something like that. But the director, Frank Darabont, he said that he watched Goodfellas a lot and really analyzed that movie because Goodfellas is another book to movie adaptation that utilizes voiceovers. So Shawshank Redemption, the book is narrated by the character Red, who is played by Morgan Freeman. And so the movie has a lot of voiceover, which is taken from the book as Red narrates it, and same with Goodfellas. And I have a book versus movie for Goodfellas, so I covered that one. Again, that and Mystic River. I covered those before I started filming these as a video, so it's just the audio available, but I love Goodfellas, just like Mystic River. That one is an amazing book and movie, so love that one so much. You should definitely check out my book versus movie for it. And this director has actually done a number of Stephen King adaptations, including The Green Mile, which is kind of similar. I feel like Shawshank, The Green Mile, and Stand By Me are 3 Stephen King books that aren't horror and just really powerful stories that people hold dear. And I have read The Green Mile. I read that in 2019, and I like that one a lot. Anyway, he also directed The Mist, which, fun fact, The Mist was one of the options in that novella Stephen King poll I posted, and I decided that I am going to be covering that one as well. That one was runner-up in the poll, and so that is one I will be talking about later on this month. But to get back to Shawshank Redemption, from here on out, I will be getting into the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward for both the book and the movie. So in the book and movie, it is the same where Andy's wife is cheating on him with this golf pro, and when the golf pro and his wife are found shot dead, the murder is put on Andy, and even though in court he claims he is innocent, he just has this very straightforward demeanor, like he's not trying to like suck up to anybody, or he's not playing a part of like the sympathetic husband. He's just very straightforward, and that does not get any pity with the jury, and so they find him guilty even though there's a lack of evidence. And when he arrives in jail, he talks to Red, the narrator of this story, and he tells Red that he's innocent, but Red just plays it off because he's like, didn't you know, like, everybody at Shawshank is innocent. No one is guilty. And that's the joke where everybody, every inmate is like, I don't belong here. I shouldn't be here. I'm innocent. I didn't do it, right? But Andy, he actually is innocent. But of course, when he tells people that, they're like, yeah, everybody's innocent. Didn't you know? However, Red actually does admit to his crime. And so he says that he's the only guilty man at Shawshank because he's the only one that admits it. However, in the movie, we don't know what the details are of why he's in jail, but we do learn in the book that he was like not forced to marry, but he ended up marrying this woman he didn't want to marry, I guess. And he messed with the brakes of her car, wanting her to die. However, the day he messed with her car, she picked up like her sister and her sister's baby. And so all three of them ended up dying, and he was charged with the murder of all three. And in the book, Red is his nickname because he has red hair and he is Irish, where of course in the movie he is played by Morgan Freeman, and his nickname is Red because his last name is Redding in the movie. And Morgan Freeman was nominated for his role in this film, however he did not win. Shawshank Redemption was also nominated for Best Picture, but it lost to Forrest Gump, which came out that year. Anyway, in book and movie, Red is the guy that can get stuff, so when people want to buy something, they go to him, and that is how he gets to know Andy, because Andy comes up to him at some point and says he wants to buy a rock hammer, which is just this, tiny little hammer used to like chisel rocks and carve rocks, and he buys other things from Red too, like a rock blanket, which is what you use to like sand down stones. And so in book and movie, he just says that, that used to be a hobby of his, and it's, something that he can pass the time with here in jail as well. And then at one point in book and movie, he asks Red if he can get him a poster of Rita Hayworth. This takes place, he goes to jail in like 1947, by the way. So he wants a pinup poster of Rita Hayworth, and so Red gets it for him. And through the years, he has a variety of different posters. Like in the movie, he has Rita Hayworth, Marilyn Monroe, and then Raquel Welch. Whereas in the book, he has more. Like, he has those three, but he also has like Jane Mansfield and Linda Ronstadt. And I think there were others too. But anyway, so the pinup posters change as the decades go on. And then in the movie, at a later point, Andy gives Red a harmonica as a gift, whereas in the book that never happened. But shortly after he gets the rock hammer and the rock blankets, he does give Red a gift of like this sculpted rock he has made. And then in book and movie, which this movie is a very faithful adaptation, so as far as the differences, there's some relatively big differences, but for the most part, it is a very faithful adaptation, and this is a novella, so it is easy for them to just get everything in the movie because it was a short book to begin with. Anyway, so in book and movie, there are these guys called the Sisters in the jail, and they are men who will rape other inmates. And they go after Andy for a couple of years, and Andy always puts up a fight, but ultimately they always get him. And in the book, Andy had smuggled in $500, which is not mentioned in the movie, but one night the main guy attacks Andy and beats him up really bad. And then that night, the guards attack that guy and beat him up horribly, so much so that he has to go to this mental infirmary, whatever thing for the rest of his days, and he has to eat food through a straw. And in the book, it is implied that Andy paid the guards to beat that guy up, whereas in the movie, it's shown where the guards did it as a favor to Andy, because at this point, the guards like Andy because he does their finances. So in the book, he paid them to do it, whereas in the movie, they just did it because they wanted to help Andy, I guess. But yeah, so the sisters bother Andy for a couple of years, but then after this main guy gets beat up super bad, from there on out, it's not a problem. And then speaking of helping the guards with their finances, so in book and movie, there is this project where one of the roofs needs to be tarred, and so Red and Andy and some of the other buddies are picked to tar this roof. And so they're up there tarring the roof, and this guard is talking, and Andy and all the other inmates overhear how this guy, his brother died, and he is left with $30,000, but he's complaining, being but then the government takes half of it, and this and this, and just complaining. And so Andy walks up to him, because Andy had been a banker, and he tells the guy hey, there's a legal way where you can keep all of that money and you don't need to give any in taxes. And the guy at first is very angry that Andy is approaching him, but long story short, Andy helps this guy keep all of the money, and in return, all he asks is that this guy give him and the other men tarring the roof a couple of years. And this is an important thing to his fellow inmates, because as they're sitting on this roof drinking beers a couple days later, Red says how like it felt like they could have been out just like tarring a friend's roof and enjoying a beer together, right? Like it made them feel free and not like they were just some inmates in a cell, right? And Andy doesn't even drink, so he just sits not drinking, just enjoying seeing his coworkers enjoy these beers. And then from here on out, word gets around and Andy ends up helping a lot of guards with various financial things. And then he starts doing their tax returns as well. So he becomes a very key inmate to these guards. And he also helps the warden with his finances. And in the warden has a lot of shady dealings going on. And so Andy helps him to like launder this money so that the warden can keep it and not get found out. And also because the guards and the warden end up liking Andy. I mean, they like him because he's useful, right? But they still look down on him because he is an inmate. But nonetheless, he gets moved from the laundry to the library. And in the library, he ends up writing letters to get more books and more funding. And so he really just turns this library into something so much bigger. And he helps people get their GEDs and other things. And so he just really turns things around in a lot of different ways for the men at Shawshank. And he's able to keep his own cell as well. He doesn't have a cellmate in the movie. In the book, he does have one cellmate at one point, but he's able to, have the nice library job and have his cell to himself and all these things because he is helping the guards with their finances and the warden. In the movie, there is an older guy named Brooks who had worked in the library. And after he has been there for like 50 years, he gets parole. However, when he gets on parole, before he leaves, he kind of freaks out because he's scared to leave because he's been in jail for 50 years, right? Like the majority of his life has been spent at Shawshank. And all the other men are confused, like, why would he not want to get out of here? But Red understands because Red has also been there longer. And he's like, hey, once you've been in here for that long, especially once you've been in here for longer than you were on the outside, the thought of getting out is terrifying. Like in living in the real world, like that's just, you can't bear the thought of it. And this is all in the movie, by the way. So when Brooks gets out, we see him trying to adjust to the world, but how he's just really struggling. And he writes in a letter describing all of this to his previous fellow inmates. And in the end, he ends up committing suicide because he just can't deal with it. And a lot of the dialogue, which when he is trying to adjust to the world, like I said, that wasn't in the book. And a lot of the dialogue is actually taken from the ending when Red gets out of jail. So some of the things Red says is used in this part with Brooks for the movie. And in the book, they do talk about the guy owning the bird, and he has kept the bird for so long, and then when he sets it free, the bird doesn't know how to adjust to being free and it ends up dying. And in the movie, Brooks is the one who has the bird and he does set it free, but then we don't see anything. But I did read that they did film a scene where they find the bird and it has died, but it just got cut from the movie. But yeah, so all that stuff with Brooks, that I don't remember that being in the book. Maybe it was like briefly mentioned, but it wasn't as big of a thing as it ended up being in the movie. And then there is a scene exclusive to the movie where Andy is able to lock himself in the warden's office and he puts an opera record on and he plays it over the loudspeaker. And this is a huge moment where all the inmates just like stop and enjoy the music. And again, it's one of those moments where they just feel free and it's just such an empowering moment. And Andy ends up doing solitary for it, but he's like, that's the easiest solitary I've ever done because, the whole time, because it was worth it. And the whole time I just, had the music with me, like in my mind and in my heart. And they're all kind of confused. And he's like, yeah, I mean, there's things that the guards and the warden in this prison, there's things that they can't take from you and you need to hold on to that. And I thought that was a great scene, both when he's playing the music, but also this conversation he has afterwards and how the importance of holding on to hope. And Red is very resistant to this and he thinks it's dangerous to have hope. But then Andy holds firm and he brings up Brooks being like, you mean we should be like Brooks? Where like, even if we do get parole because we've lost hope, we can't cope with the outside world anymore, And so, yeah, I thought that was a great part in the movie. But in book and movie, when Andy has been in for like 10 years, so in the book, Andy is in prison for like 29 years, whereas in the movie they cut it down and it's only 19. So as far as the time frame when Tommy shows up, I don't remember the specifics with book and movie and if it's the same amount of time, but anyway, this guy named Tommy shows up and he is instantly liked by Red and Andy and the other men, and he decides he wants to get his GED, so Andy really helps him. And when he's taking the test, in the movie, Tommy feels very discouraged, like he failed, but then Andy submits the test anyway, and turns out he passed with a C. And I don't remember the details of that in the book. But anyway, one day in book and movie, Tommy is asking someone else what Andy is in for, and they tell him that he is in for killing his wife and this golf pro she was cheating with. And Tommy then tells Andy, and maybe Red. In the movie, he tells both of them. In the book, I don't know. He might have just told Andy. Anyway, he tells Andy that a while ago he was doing time at another prison and his cellmate told him that he had killed a woman and this golf pro who had been in bed together, and that the whole thing ended up being pinned on this lady's hotshot husband. And so he just gets a kick out of it that he got away with this murder and it was blamed on the husband. And so Tommy tells this to Andy, and Andy goes to the warden and he's like, hey, you need to find this guy. He gives him the name. He's the one that killed those two people. That was blamed on me. And so we can pursue this and I can be set free. We can get a new trial, all this stuff. But the warden is just like, oh, that's a ridiculous story. I can't believe you bought it. Clearly, Tommy is just trying to impress you with this lie. But Andy is like, but we could at least check it out. Like, come on, I could be set free. Come on. But the warden just is not interested. And he even puts Andy in solitary. And then in the movie afterwards, he goes up to Tommy and he's like, would you testify in court against this guy in order to help Andy be free? And Tommy is like, yeah, I would. And after he says that, the guards end up shooting him and he is killed. Whereas in the book, the warden proposes like a trade to Tommy, being like, hey, we'll switch you to a nicer prison where you get weekends off, you can go see your wife and your new baby, and we'll transfer you there if you promise to never speak of that cellmate or Andy or any of that ever again. And Tommy takes the deal and he leaves, and that's the end of that. So quite a difference as far as Tommy being killed in the movie, whereas in the book, he just takes this trade where he's able to go to a better prison. And yeah, Andy is not able to pursue that lead and nothing comes of it. And he is very distraught after this. And it is the lowest Red has ever seen him because Andy always has just this confidence and this air about him. Not like pride, but just like this inner peace that the other prisoners don't. And it's not until after this whole thing that he starts to just get that weighed down heavy feeling the other men have. Which, speaking of the warden too, in the book, while Andy is there are like 3 different wardens, whereas in the movie, it's one warden throughout the whole movie. But to talk about Andy's escape, so in the book and movie, Andy and Red have this conversation about how Andy wants to live in this coastal town in Mexico and just enjoy the sunshine, and he wants to have just this small little hotel, and he's like, I don't feel like that's much to ask for, after all I've gone through in life, like, that's all I want is to live in the sun and have this little hotel that I can run. And he tells Red that, like, you could use a guy like him at this hotel, but Red is like, oh, in here, I'm the guy who can get stuff, but out there, like, I'm nobody. I don't even know what to do in the real world at this point because he's been in jail for so long, but Andy is like, I think you're selling yourself short and you're more capable than you realize. But he also tells Red about this field up in this nearby town where there is this black rock that is like black obsidian. And it's a little different because in the book, he tells Red how he had a friend on the outside who created a false identity for him and who also invested money for him. And so under this rock is like a key to a safe deposit box and his identification for this new identity. And so when he gets out, he wants to find this rock and find his, these new identity papers so he can start a new life and use this money to create his hotel. Whereas in the movie, he tells him about this rock and he tells Red, if you ever get out, go to that field and find that rock and you'll find something under it. But in the movie, after this conversation, it is the very next day that Andy has escaped. And in the movie, like Red and the other guys who were friends with Andy were worried about Andy because he seemed to be suicidal. And so Red says how that night he did not get any sleep because he was so worried about Andy. Whereas that was not the case in the book. And in fact, that conversation he has with Red, it's like 8 years after that conversation that Andy actually escapes. So it was a much longer period of time. And like I said, in the book, he escapes in like 76, whereas in the movie, he escapes in 66. But anyway, so the morning of his escape, they see he is missing from his cell, and they don't find the hole in the wall until like that evening, almost 24 hours later. They find that the pinup posters he's had through the years, it blocks this hole that he had dug to get out of the wall, out of the prison. And in the book, one of the guards, the warden tells the guard to go in the tunnel, and the guard starts freaking out because the tunnel is full of crap. And Red starts laughing so much so that they have to put him in solitary because he's like being too much of a distraction. And so everything else Red has to hear secondhand through one of the other inmates, whereas in the movie, that's not the case. And also, like I said, in the book, Andy had this false identity set up by someone else, and this person had also invested money for him, and this person had also died, by the way, while Andy was in jail. Whereas in the movie, he has this false identity he sets up in order to launder the money that the warden is making. So he has created this false identity to help the warden. However, in the end of the movie, I think he takes on that false identity, and then he takes the warden's money, and he also, tells the cops and stuff about the warden, about his shady business deals. So that part was definitely different, where his money, he was taking the warden's money in the end of the movie. And also the warden, when the cops are coming to arrest him and the other guards who have been doing, these bad business deals, the warden ends up shooting himself rather than deal with being arrested. And that was not the case in the book. I think in the book he does, I feel like the wardens and the guards do get in trouble for some of the shady stuff they were doing in the book, but now I'm having a hard time remembering specifically. I don't remember any warden killing himself though. But so Andy escapes, and then in book and movie, it's explained how he did it. Basically just, crawling through a tunnel, essentially. And then in book and movie, Red also gets a postcard sometime later from this coastal Texas town. And it doesn't say who it's from, and it doesn't have any message, but he knows that this is where Andy went from the US into Mexico. And then when Red has been in for 40 years, he is finally granted parole. And when he gets out, like I said, he has a hard time adjusting to life. And he says very similar things as Brooks does, which, like I said, in the movie, the stuff with Brooks was taken from the part with Red. And so it's kind of repetitive in the movie when we have Red adjusting to life, and he's literally in the same apartment as Brooks had been, and he's doing the same job, and he's having the exact same struggles. And so it felt kind of repetitive, being like, we already saw this an hour ago with Brooks. Whereas in the book, this was our first time hearing about this. So in the movie, it was a bit repetitive, but I guess that was the point. But Red also struggles with wanting to kill himself, but he doesn't because he just thinks of Andy, and this thought of Andy and all that Andy did helps him hold on. But in the movie, they almost tried to get the viewer to think whoa, is Red gonna kill himself? And that just seemed repetitive too, because it's we already saw that with Brooks. And then we saw that with Andy too, because in the movie, they make it seem like Andy is suicidal when really he isn't. And so to have that again with Red, it's this is 3 times now in the movie, you've made us think someone might end up killing themselves. So it was a bit much in my mind. Anyway, in book and movie, Red decides to look for that black rock in that field. In the book, he doesn't know that there's anything for him under that black rock. He just wants to do it to see if it's really there. Whereas in the movie, he's doing it because Andy told him there will be something for him under this rock. And when he finds this rock, he finds a letter for him underneath it. And in this letter, it says that, Andy made it to this coastal town, or that he's on his way to the coastal town, and he would love Red to join him. And so in the book, it ends with Red on his way to see Andy. Whereas in the movie, we actually see him from a distance. The camera pans out as he arrives in Mexico, and he and Andy are reunited in the end of the movie. But as he is headed out to find Andy in the end of the book, there is a line which reads, "I think it is the excitement that only a free man can feel. A free man starting a long journey whose conclusion is uncertain." And a lot of the dialogue from the book, by the way, is directly used in the movie, including that line. But I like that because obviously in prison, there's not much uncertainty. It's very routine and what's going to happen. And that's part of the comfort of once you've been in there for so long, where you go into the real world and the uncertainty is gone and it can feel scary. But here he's saying how this is an excitement that only a free man can feel because of the uncertainty and starting a new adventure, and you don't know where it's going to lead. But yeah, I wanted to talk about what Andy symbolizes, which, by the way, this book and movie was kind of reminiscent of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, as well as Cool Hand Luke, because all 3 of these are about men who are institutionalized or imprisoned. And then this other guy shows up and is a symbol of hope and freedom for these men. So if you're into that type of thing, you should definitely check out my episodes for Cool Hand Luke and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But anyway, there is a part in this book, which, by the way, like I said, is narrated by Red. And near the end of the book, he says something about how he's done writing about himself. And then he writes, "Well, you weren't writing about yourself," I hear someone in the peanut gallery saying. "You were writing about Andy. You're nothing but a minor character in your own story." But that's just not so. It's all about me, every damned word of it. Andy was the part of me they could never lock up. The part of me that will rejoice when the gates finally open for me and I walk out in my cheap suit with my $20 of mad money in my pocket. That part of me will rejoice no matter how old and broken and scared the rest of me is. I guess it's just that Andy had more of that part than me and used it better. And they also have a conversation, like I said, where Red says it's dangerous to hope. But in the letter that Andy writes him in the end, he writes, "Remember that hope is a good thing, Red. Maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies." So I did think this book and movie was well done in having Andy symbolize that hope and that freedom and that best part of you that never gives up, right? No matter how difficult the situation is. And yeah, when it comes to book versus movie, I actually like the changes that the movie made. You know, I like the scene where he plays the music over the speakers. I like that the money he takes was the warden's, and so I just loved him getting revenge on the warden in that way. And I didn't mind them killing Tommy in the movie. Like, I was fine with it, how it happened in the book too, but I was fine with that change in the movie. And then the scene with Brooks was very poignant, so I enjoyed the changes they made. The acting is incredible, and the cinematography is done by Roger Deakins, who is a legend in the movie industry. And this movie was actually his first Academy nomination, and he has been nominated many times, but he did not win until 2018 for the cinematography in Blade Runner 2049. So people like movie buffs all know Roger Deakins, and he is incredible, so he did this movie, so it's definitely, the cinematography is definitely well done. But yeah, I highly recommend this movie. I definitely loved it a lot. Like I said, it's not like a new favorite. And honestly too, it's not one that has like stuck with me because I watched it like 5 days ago now. Yeah, it's not one that has stayed in my mind necessarily. Like, everything is tied up very nicely, and it is kind of not your standard story, but yeah, I don't know. It's not one that stuck with me, and it's not one that I continue to think about, and it's not one that proposes like these, I don't know, like radical ideas or something. Not that every movie needs to do that, right? Not every movie needs to be like controversial or deep or something, which this movie is deep in a way about it, you know, inspiring hope, and it does deeply affect some people, so I don't want to undermine it in that sense. But yeah, I guess I'm like hesitant to say anything too negative about it because I know so many people love it, and I totally get it. I would never try to talk someone out of loving this movie. But yeah, it just didn't impact me deeply, and there wasn't anything about it that left me thinking and dwelling on it for days afterwards, right? But while I was watching it, I was definitely very invested. It's like 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 20 minutes, but it flies by, and I cared about the characters, and I thought it was really well done. And it was an improvement on the book. So yeah, anyway, the movie wins, and that wraps it up for The Shawshank Redemption, which, by the way, they left out Rita Hayworth from the title because they thought they didn't want people thinking it was about old Hollywood, right? And so that's why they just called it The Shawshank Redemption, which I think that's fine. I think having Rita Hayworth in the title for the book is kind of random, like why mention her at all? But I mean, obviously the posters are a critical part of the story because they hide the hole he is creating, the tunnel. But yeah, that wraps it up. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Give my podcast a rating and review, sign up on Patreon, and yeah, in the meantime, get busy living or get busy dying.